Faith Forged Fathers is a podcast focused on navigating fatherhood and growing what God has called us to be as fathers. My name is Matthew Green. I'm a father of two young sons, and the mission of this podcast is to provide a wide array of experiences, perspectives, through interviewing guests from all stages of fatherhood. My hope is that we'll all learn together, gain encouragement and wisdom along the way. Thanks for listening. Welcome to this episode of Faith Forged Fathers. Today, I'm really excited to have my guest, Ben Barker, with me. He is the neighborhood alpha dad. Really excited to have him on. Been following him for a while now. Recently participated in a challenge that he put on that was really great. Push-ups, proverbs, and protein. Made a huge difference, and I'm glad that him and I are going to be able to connect, talk about our faith, talk about fatherhood. Welcome to the podcast, Ben.
Bro, thanks for having me, man. I'm excited to jump on and chat it up.
Yeah, so like most people just kind of like to start, kind of what's your story, kind of what your path to faith, path to fatherhood look like.
Man, first of all, I enjoyed listening. I put your podcast on your first episode right before listening to this, so I enjoyed getting to hear some of your backstory. My dad was a military kid, and then growing up, my dad was actually a minister, and then he went into the missions field when I was like 7. So we spent 2 years on the road going church to church, raising money. It's called, deputation, right? Raising money for us to move overseas to Romania, where my dad planted churches and worked with orphanages. So like I grew up, I was very fortunate to have parents who put a huge emphasis on faith. And I think they did it right, man. They gave me a lot of freedom to make my own decisions. They didn't like force it on me, but they did have me in church every Sunday and kind of like created the environment where I grew up in it and learned to appreciate it.
That's awesome. What was growing up overseas like?
Man, it was really cool. And that's why I feel like I will probably relate to you a lot in that regard. And I was going to ask you this. I like to think I'm a little bit of a chameleon because growing up, I was in a different place every Sunday. Mm-hmm. Lots of times I was hanging out with old people, and so at like 7, 8 years old, I could carry on a conversation with like a 65-year-old man, and it just wasn't weird because I think was a huge advantage to me, growing up and getting into the working field, is that I was able to, get along with all sorts of people and diverse backgrounds, demographics, and all of that. So I feel like that was a huge advantage.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So when did y'all come back to the States?
Okay, so let's think about it. So we went to Romania in like 1997, and we came back in 2000 because my mom was having some health issues. And so we came back to the States for better health care for her. And luckily she did great and is doing well still to this day. And so we were there for about 3 years. And then my dad continued pastoring for the rest of his career after that.
Oh, that's super cool. So one common thing that I've noticed in conversations with people that have maybe kind of grown up in church their whole life, they had like that pivot from like knowledge to relationship. What do you have like kind of that pivotal point where it sounds like, I think it's really neat. You said your parents gave you like the freedom, but still had the structure and making sure that you were, in church regularly. Do you kind of recall a time when it went from, just learning, the Bible and learning the stories to like when it flipped to this is a relationship with Jesus?
Big time. So I accepted Jesus when I was 11 years old, right? And I remember I was in Muskogee, Oklahoma. My dad was working on the computer, and I went and told him, I was like, hey, man, like I want to get saved. And so my dad led me to Jesus there on the spot. It was awesome. Was excited for like a little bit. And then, I got in like middle school and high school. And bro, I don't feel like I lived for God for like probably about 10 years, 9 years. And until I met my wife, it was right before I met my wife, I had a guy tell me, he was like, man, you need to quit playing around. He gave me a Holman Bible. He was like, man, I feel like this is a version you're going to understand. And he was like, I'm just going to tell you something. He was like, I had a guy when I was your age tell me to start praying for my future wife. And he was like, I feel like one of the biggest things that you can do to get a head start is he was like, I just want you to read 10 verses a day. He's like, I don't care what book, just start getting in the Bible every day. And I want you to start praying for your wife. And I don't know why, Matt, but that really it stuck with me. And so I started praying for my wife at like 18 or 19 years old, which I know sounds really weird. Uh, and and then when I met my wife, we were both kind of in the same place. We were like, before I'd been like dating around, I really liked girls. I wanted to date as many girls as possible. And when I met my wife, we had both decided that we were no longer going to like date to date. Like if it
Mm,
wasn't a person we couldn't see ourselves marrying, we weren't going to like play around.
yeah.
And so we met each other at like the perfect time, and it was definitely a God thing.
That's really awesome. So this guy who kind of steps in and says, "Hey, read this." Was this someone that you had like a prior relationship with, or like there was like maybe like an accountability built into it, or was this someone who was just like, "Hey, kind of feel like I need to speak into you"? Like what did that dynamic look like?
So our church, the church that my dad had been the pastor of, my dad had left that church and he was kind of commuting back and forth between Oklahoma and Arkansas. And the youth pastor left when my dad left. And so this time I was between like 17, 18, 19, like that age range. And this guy was a volunteer youth pastor who was doing it because his girls were in the youth group and there was nobody else that could do it. And he was basically, it just fell in his lap. And he was like, he owned a lumber yard. He was like this gruff dude that loved Jesus and was just kind of like, that wasn't his job, no training, but he just loved Jesus and loved his kids. And so he took over the youth group. And for whatever reason, like he invested a lot into me.
That's 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 cool. Do you ever still are y'all in touch still, or is it just
So I wish, so funny, like not funny story. A couple years ago, he had a heart attack and
oh
passed
no?
away. And he was a pretty young guy. I mean, I say young, he was probably like mid 50s, but pretty cool. The Bible that he gave me, I still use daily,
Oh,
and
that's
it's
awesome.
falling apart, and I just can't bring myself to get rid of it. And
Sure.
I actually messaged his daughters the other day. I messaged the three of them in a group, and I sent a picture of them with the Bible. And I was like, "Hey guys, I haven't talked to them in like 7 or 8 years." And I was like, "Hey, I just wanted you guys to know that I'm still using the Bible daily that your dad gave me like, I don't know, like 15 years ago."
That's special. Yeah, our pastor says it like one of the best things you can like pass down to your kids is a worn out Bible, right? So I think
Yeah.
that that's really cool that you got yours to the point where it's it's falling apart. Like I get excited because mine's starting to like the outside's falling off, and like I'm like yes,
That's a
I
win,
never
bro.
thought
That's a
I'd be so
win.
excited like it's like worn out. Um, so like as you kind of started building that rhythm of reading 10 verses a day, is that something that just do you have you maintained that over time? Like what did that rhythm outside of praying for your wife that sounded like that turned out great. How about that other side of the rhythm?
Man, what's really cool is, we were right before we started recording, we were kind of talking like the parallels of like faith and fitness,
Hmm.
and there's a lot of cool ones, and I think I wrote one of the first articles I wrote on my blog was just start. And it's like a lot of people they get bogged down and like, oh, what Bible study should I do? Like, what version of the Bible should I get? And I'm like, stop it. Like, use the YouVersion Bible app, like Bible Gateway, steal the one from the hotel. I'm just kidding. Don't steal the one from the hotel. But like, you can get an inexpensive Bible. You can read it on your phone. Like, just read and get in there, and it'll grow from there. And like in fitness, I always tell people, like, if you don't know what to do, like, start walking daily, like just
Yeah,
go for a
keep
walk,
it
right?
simple.
And usually it'll snowball and you'll build momentum from there. And so to answer your question, it started with 10 verses and eventually it grew, to maybe a chapter a day. And then since then, over time, I've just used different methods of studying. My dad uses a method called SOAP. It's an
So
acronym and it stands for scripture, observation, application, prayer. And so say like for the day, like, we just got done doing the protein Proverbs and push-ups challenge. And so say I was reading Proverbs 1 for the day and a specific verse stood out to me. So I'll write down the specific verse and I'll pray about it. And I'll be like, God, what should stand out to me? That's my observation, my application. How am I going to use this? And then I pray about it.
I love that. I feel like that's how my brain works. I feel like it's like the application component of it. I think is the piece. Like I found I've had pastors that are like really great in application. I found some that are really great in like really unpacking things, and like when you can find one that can marry those up, like I feel like that's super powerful. And this just clicks with my brain. And so thank you for sharing, because I love that. And so um, I had an instance this weekend just referencing the challenge that our pastor referenced, how so often we go back to sin that we've been delivered from. And he brought up the verse from Proverbs about just like a dog returns to its vomit, and I was like, I underlined that one because one, I was like, whoa, hold on, but thanks to your challenge, like that was something that was quickly kind of percolating in the brain. And so,
It's a gross verse, but I mean, it'll hit you right in the chest.
yeah, because like so often, like it may be gross, but like so when we get upset with our dogs, like when they actually truly do, and you're like, oh, you're nasty, what are you doing? And then you think about you know ourselves, and we do that so often. And my pastor's been using an analogy of like a clothes hamper lately, and you work out in clothes and you get them nasty and sweaty, and so often we throw them, they get thrown in the hamper, and that can be kind of viewed as like maybe when our life's chaotic, or where maybe we have sinned or whatever, but our mercy is new each and every day. But so often, rather than going and putting on the fresh garments that God is kind of the grace and mercy, we go try to pick up the dirty, sweat-soaked clothes to put them back on and wear them that day. Um, just kind of like building on the dog vomit situation. So it's been good analogies. And so kind of jumping into you brought up fitness. When did fitness kind of become a key pillar for you?
Early, man. So I was played football, I ran track, and I loved the weight room. I went to a school. We were terrible at football, but like the weight room was like very important, and I saw that it made a difference for me. And then in college, I played football in college, and I ran track, and I ended up just sticking with track through my senior year, and had a great strength coach in college, and I just loved it, dude. I've always just kind of eaten it up, and the plan was to be a strength coach, like a
Hmm.
college strength and conditioning coach. But then I realized like the hours that those guys work. And I got married right after my junior year of college, going into my senior year. And I realized I didn't want to live that life when I had kids.
Hmm.
So I went into like just my own kind of the fitness field rather than strength and conditioning. But it's all I've ever done, and I love it.
That's cool. So did you, I guess, do you currently, or did you used to do like one-on-one in person kind of stuff? And are you more, I guess, online now? Kind of what's that structure look like for you?
I have a really weird like split right now. So originally I was always personal training. I did like some group fitness classes and stuff like that. I was at I was at three different gyms, over the course of my career. Most recently, I was at a gym called F45.
Hmm.
About a year and a half ago, I left that gym and went out completely on my own. And I kept some like in-person clients that I've been training in home for like several years, a lot of it online. And then actually recently, I had a weird job opportunity fall in my lap in marketing and
Oh,
in
cool.
social media content creation. And my wife and I prayed about it hard. And so I'm still doing everything I was doing online, the personal training, and I took on a new job recently. And we prayed hard about it, and we just kind of felt like it was a God thing. So we went for it.
I mean, you're great at it. So, I mean, it's no surprise. I wouldn't even say it fell in your lap. I mean, I think you're equipped for it. So even going from like the F45 to kind of going out on your own, like those are big steps that take a lot of courage. So what it sounds like, leaning on prayer, but kind of what did that look like as you're, going up to a big decision like that?
Man, my wife and I have always been big on like when we have a big decision, and especially if I feel like it's. I heard recently, like if you feel like rushed to make a decision, like sometimes you shouldn't make that decision. But I think
Mm.
sometimes in life, it happens that way where you need to make a decision quickly. And in situations like that, I'd been in this job, and it was the great boss, pretty good coworkers for the most part, but I'd gotten in this position where I was in charge and I got some employees that wouldn't show up. And if they didn't show up, I had to be there. And so I was working like 5 nights a week, Saturday, and then basically every other Sunday. And you get it with, a
Yeah.
family that's tough. And so I'd gotten to the point where I knew I was going to leave. And it was kind of like timing wise, is right before the new year. I didn't want to leave in January. So I felt like I needed to leave so he could get somebody else in
Mm.
place before the New Year's rush. And so my wife and I prayed about it and we felt at peace about it. And I will say this, guys, if you don't pray with your spouse, that's one of the most powerful things. I feel like my wife has like great intuition and she'll pray hard as well. And man, it's a powerful thing because I can just think of twice in the last 2 years that we've had a huge decision to make, and praying about it together, I think, is kind of the only thing that got us to the correct decision.
I love that. One question I've really had kind of leading up to this is what what did the I guess creation or formation of the neighborhood alpha dad, like where did that come from? Was it accidental, like you just like, oh, this will be funny, and then it kind of stuck, or was it something like it's hilarious? I'm not gonna lie,
Thank
which I
you.
think is super cool. Like you find someone based on content like that, and then you start digging deeper. And I was like, oh, like this is cool. Like you'd say, hey, black coffees, barbells, and Bible, and I'm like, oh, hold on, like I like that. And then it was like I'm trying to think of a couple of other ones. You had like Proverbs. I mean, obviously Proverbs, push-ups, protein, and you had just like all these like fun alliteration. But I'm like, like there was always something spiritual in it, and I thought that always stood out to me. But I guess kind of going back, where did your the neighborhood alpha dad come from?
Uh, so I've struggled, right before we started recording, we were talking about my blue light glasses, struggled with sleep. I'm just not a good sleeper. I don't need a lot of sleep, but I realized I was getting even below the amount that I needed. And so I'd read something about getting sunlight earlier in the day was good for your circadian rhythm, right?
Hmm.
And so I was trying to get outside and get sunlight early in the day. And I'd also read like more skin exposure, the better. So I just started walking like without my shirt on and shoeless. And just one day, joking around, I pulled out my camera walking the neighborhood. And I was like, if you really want to be the neighborhood alpha dad, you got to have short shirts, short shorts, no shirt, and a hat that doesn't quit. And that video just kind of like popped off, and it was just a joke. And so I kind of got some traction with that. And then it just kind of spiraled from there.
That's so cool. Have you ever had like a neighbor come out, like when you're like in the middle of setting up a rack in the middle of the street, or like someone slow roll you in their car, and like what, like how often have you had that happen?
Several. And our neighborhood's really weird because like we're on like a big hill. And so like lots of houses, like when you're getting out of your car, going in your house, you'll talk to your neighbors. Our driveways are so steep, like you have to pull in your garage. You can't park on your driveways.
Mm.
And so I don't have like like we're all friendly, but we don't just talk to our neighbors a lot. And bro, never fails. I'm just out there like setting up my squat rack in the middle of the street, and they're like coming out to check their mailbox. And it's always just kind of like, they like give me a little wave, but they also look like they're a little bit scared of me. Like, not because I'm physically imposing, but because they think I'm crazy.
Well, it probably is because you're gonna, you bow at them a little bit, and you're like, oh, hold on, wait a second, you guys trying to fight me? No, that's awesome. Um, so one question I'm curious is like having spent a lot of time coaching. Fitness has been something that has been kind of near and dear to you for a long time. Um, I know one thing that I struggle with is like juggling everything I got going on, and finding myself using like, oh, I don't have time, you know. And I'm curious, what is, I guess, the biggest excuse or the biggest reason you hear from men or dads as to why maybe they're not able to um, reach the fitness level they're capable of? Because clearly it's possible, because you put the rhythms and routines and the discipline into your life. So what have you found in all of your interactions is like a common excuse, I would say?
Man, I think the most common one is, there's not enough hours in the day. And then I think dads specifically, it's like I think a lot of guys feel like they're taking away from time with their family if they're going to work on themselves. And the easiest way to get around that is to work out at home and to involve your kids. Um, and, I take my workouts seriously. And sometimes does it detract from the workout, like intensity a little bit that I have my kids out there? Yes. But does that matter? No. I think it's kind of like, just like them seeing me read my Bible is important, or like us praying before bed. I think them seeing me, prioritizing like physical health as well is
Mm.
important, so that they have a good relationship with that and they see me do that. And then it's also like quality time together, man. Like they love, if I hop on the ground, and I'm sure you probably experienced this. If I hop on the ground, like to do push-ups and my kids are around, inevitably, like they end up on my back.
Oh yeah.
And it's just like a thing. And like, it makes the push-ups harder for me. I get more resistance and they think it's like the coolest thing ever. It's a win-win.
Yeah, and inevitably they're coming off the top rope of the couch, and you don't you don't see it coming. Yeah,
Every
and
time.
that's definitely what your challenge kind of built. Even the simple question of like one of my sons will be like, "Hey, Dad, got your proverb read? Hey, Dad, got your push-ups done?" And I'm like, "Not yet." And I don't know how many times it would be like 11 o'clock. And I think you and I even exchanged a couple direct messages pretty late in the day. Like I'm over there woofing yogurt and eat. I've never had the more random combination of foods late at night, but I was like, is this optimal? Like how I'm doing it? Probably
Mm-hmm.
not, but I'm gonna do it.
Yep.
I don't care. It's not about being perfect. It's about doing it, and then you can optimize later. Because I knew the question was coming the next day from my oldest. Like, hey, are you on track still? Because I kept telling him every day, like, oh, I'm
Yep.
27 for 27, 28 for 28. And he was just like, started asking the questions. And then like the other day, he was knocking push-ups out while he was doing laundry. And I'm like, nice. And so all that kind of stuff just stems from the thing that you put in place, which I think is really cool.
Yep. That's a dad win, bro. That's a dad win.
And so from the standpoint of like feeling like you're taking time away, like do you find when you actually start or seeing people building that rhythm and routine that they actually end up having more energy to pour into their family versus maybe being lethargic, and it's actually a different effect than they expected?
Yeah, 100%. And I had this conversation, boy, I can't even remember who it was with, but a guy I had on my podcast talking about, he was like, just because you're physically present in the home, like doesn't mean you're making a difference. He was like, like I think, dads in like, not in general, but used to, it was like a big deal, like on the sitcoms, like let's say like early 2000s, 90s, it was like, you're there and you're watching the football game and nobody can talk to you during the football game.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, you're there, but you're not like mentally present.
Sure.
And so I would rather, this is just personal opinion, but like, let's say you have, 3 hours in the evening, right, with your kids, and you're just watching Netflix or playing on your phone. Like that's not time well spent. But let's say you work out for an hour and then you spend 2 hours of quality time with your kids, like what's better there? And personal opinion, I think 2 hours fully invested is better than 3 hours not invested.
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah, that's a point that the guest that's actually on my podcast that went live today was making. So he tends to work with like overlooked youth, and I think so often when we think fatherlessness, we think like dad is out of the picture. And he said there's just as many instances that he finds where dad is present, but he's not present at the same. He's in his Outlook inbox still. He's in tomorrow. What my work calendar looks like, and so you can be physically present, but mentally absolutely checked out.
100%. The same guy. Oh, bro, it's Nate Norman. Nate Norman is the guy I had on my podcast, and Nate is great. He's a believer, and he talks about, somebody coined it, and it's a play on a not nice acronym, but they call it Big Dad Energy. And he
Mm.
talks about like when he gets home, lots of times he'll have his wife turn on a Bluetooth speaker in the house, and he'll connect his iPhone to it, and he'll start playing like AC/DC or something, and he'll like kick open the door to the house and like go in there and like, and like wrestle his kids and stuff. And he was talking about, I used to feel bad, because I work these long hours and stuff like that. He has, a blue collar job. And he's like, when I get home, he's like, I got to like flip that switch. And I just immediately go like harden the paint and make the kids like excited that I'm home.
Yeah. Yeah, and those are the memories that absolutely stick with them. That just last forever, right? Just dad breaking the door off the hinges, coming in ready to rumble.
I have no data to back this up. I've seen a lot about it. Like, if you're following like the right accounts on social media, I think social media is like a beautiful thing. And so I'm getting like, even just like on my, I don't know what you call it on Instagram, but like my For You page, like whatever, like on
Hmm.
Reels, Explore page, like a lot of stuff about parenting and like Christ being at the center of that. This wasn't a faith based one, but it was something about like that, like rough and like tumble kind of play with your kids is like some of the most important like time you have with them. So like wrestling, all that type of stuff, like rough housing, because it's like one, like physical touch, it's a love language, right? And it's just like a fun way. They expend energy, they get a little bit of exercise, and it's like one of the best things that we as fathers can do for our kids. Again, I don't have data to back that up, but just anecdotal evidence. I see what that does for my kids, like when I play with them like that.
Yeah, no, I agree. My sons just, I feel like they could go for hours. Like they
Yep.
I get tired before they do because they're just like they
Yeah.
could soak
Same.
it up
Same.
for they could soak it up for hours and hours. I'm kind of curious. So, growing up, I guess in and around the church, and kind of having that mix of freedom, but also like that structure. Is that kind of a similar approach? I get you're taking with your family broadly in terms of obviously you have the discipline and a routine with fitness. Is there like a similar kind of structure to how you grew up? With how you're approaching leading your family from a faith standpoint.
Definitely. And like growing up in faith, faith based and in church and being a lot of different places, I've seen like every end of the spectrum. And so a lot of the way I come at it, is like I feel like my parents, you look back and like nobody's parents are perfect. My parents would admit that, but my parents did like a really good job. Like they were good parents. But I've also seen people that were like so strict and so legalistic.
Hmm.
And typically, when you're like that and you give them no breathing room, no freedom to make choices, nothing like that, I feel like 9 out of 10 times those kids typically, when they get in college and get like an inch of freedom, I've seen a lot of those kids kind of go off the deep end because they're
Yeah.
so curious. They got no freedom to do anything, make any decisions. So it's kind of my goal. And I think that's what Jesus does for us, man. Um, Jesus, like, if he wanted us to force us to worship him and to like be slaves, like he could have done that. He's powerful enough, but he gave us free will where we can choose to accept him or not. And so I'm going to give my kids that freedom. I hope to give them every advantage possible. Like
Hmm.
I'm going to have them in church on Sundays. My wife and I have made a decision. Like we're not going to put our kids in sports that are going to keep us out of church on Sundays. We're just not going to do that. And we're going to do a devotional with them every evening and things like that and let them see
Oh, that's
us
cool.
like living it out. And one thing our church does a really good job of, our church has Serve Saturday once a month where we go out and serve like an underprivileged community.
Oh, that's awesome.
And man, I think just getting our kids involved in that so they can see like being the hands and feet of Jesus, that's my main goal. And then I pray, that the Holy Spirit will move on them and that they'll make the right decision at the right time.
I think that's super cool, and I think the fact that like you going and serving with them, and I think like walking the walk with them is like the best thing you can do. Especially with, I think that's one of the things I admire so much. Like, is of you is not, hey, I'm going to teach my kids how to be healthy and how to treat themselves well. No, you're showing them, right? You're not telling them what they should do with their read the Bible, do this. You're showing them, and I think that that's something that comes through in so many even modeling what a healthy relationship with your wife looks like to your and we're going to pray together, we're going to make decisions together, especially when they're these big kind of life altering things, and that's something that I respect tremendously
I
about how
appreciate
you
that.
handle everything. And so I guess in terms of I like kind of going back your the article you referenced about, just start. I think that there's a lot of power to that, and whether that's your faith or your fitness, is that you know, in terms of maybe giving some practical advice to dads that maybe are just kind of struggling to figure out where like what step one needs to look like, and how do we juggle all this how do I lead my family and do so healthy, and this, like, there's so many spinning plates. Like, what would be a practical piece of advice you'd give them?
Man, our pastor at our church one time said something that really stuck with me. He was talking about, and making big decisions in life and stuff like that. He has people come to him and they're like, if only I could hear, God's voice out loud if he'd tell me what to do. And he was like, he leaned in and he was like, if you want to hear God's voice out loud, read the Bible out loud.
Ooh.
And he was like, it's like people make it this big complicated thing, but like the Bible is literally God's spoken word, and like read it.
Yeah.
That's not super deep, but get in it daily, and like just like you talked about, dude, hitting your push-ups or cramming in your protein at 11 at night. I read my Bible in the morning just for me. I think it makes sense, like heading out into the day, to do it before I go out in the world to fix my
Mm-hmm.
attitude, and hopefully that way, God can work and move through me. But if you forget in the morning and you're laying in bed at night, like watching Netflix on your phone, like read your verses for the day, and like get in the Bible and just like make it a non-negotiable. Like
Mm.
just don't miss.
Key. I think I don't know why so often, like, when we think about where we have margin and what maybe gets put aside first, why something that's the most important thing tends to be the one that we feel we have the most flexibility to. I don't know if that's because, like, we have uh, the hope and confidence, like, oh, there's grace and mercy and forgiveness, so which is absolutely incredible. But I wonder if that's kind of a byproduct of like why we push it aside. Um, but so in terms of making it a non-negotiable, is that just something that you have as just like a personal commitment, or do you have any kind of like any checks and balance in place for yourself, like kind of holding yourself to hitting it daily?
I should. And like that's one thing I'm bad about. I am pretty good at like holding myself accountable with exercise, eating, like reading my Bible and all that. I think it'd be wise. And I'll say one thing that I've done better over the last year. During COVID, like we went through like a church change because our church kind of disbanded, and we
Mm.
started like doing church online, and which is great. But I got very comfortable for like a year. I liked watching church in my pajamas on Sunday morning, and I wasn't a part of a small group for a couple
Mm.
years. And even when we joined our new church, it's a pretty big church. And so like we got comfortable like just going and like slipping out after the service and not getting connected. And I will say this, dude, once over the last year, my wife and I finally got in a small group and we're doing a study together, and having the accountability, and like our leader puts a lot into it. So like I feel compelled to do my
Mm.
study before I go, because it's just like slapping them in the face, if I
Yeah.
don't go prepared. So man, having a little bit of accountability for literally anything like makes a huge difference.
Yeah, and I think you highlighting the importance of being in community and being in a small group is really really awesome, because that made a huge difference for us. Whether it's just like being in fellowship with other believers and fellow dads and stuff, but just like you said, last thing you want to do is show up to a group and you clearly didn't prioritize something that is important to other people, and you don't get to actually contribute to the conversation. And you kind of feel silly at that point. And it's one of those, like, I think if we're all being honest and we checked our screen time on our phone, like we all have a couple, probably more hours in the day than we'd like to admit to allocate to our Bible.
100%.
But well, dude, I appreciate you coming on, dropping some knowledge bombs. Is there, like, where's the best place to find you, follow you, if they're interested in coaching, whatever it may be? What's the best place to find you?
Probably best place is Instagram at Ben Barker Fitness. And then I also have benbarkerfitness.com where I have like a free workout plan, a workout subscription, like stuff like that where you can connect with me on there as well.
Nice. Well, good stuff, man. Well, appreciate your time, Ben. Thanks for coming on, man. Enjoyed
Bro,
it.
Matt, I appreciate it a bunch, man. I enjoyed this.
Awesome, man. Have a good night.
You as well.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Faith Forged Fathers podcast, please leave us a 5-star review on whichever podcast platform you're listening from. Subscribe to the podcast and also head on over to Instagram and follow at Faith Forged Fathers. Thanks again for listening.